and a very warm welcome from all of us at Women in Football to this webinar where we're talking to and about male allies. And I'm delighted to say we've got four fantastic male allies with us today who I'll introduce in a second. But firstly, a word about you, our wonderful Women in Football members. Thank you for all the support that you've given us and given to each other over the past very difficult year and a half. We started our webinar programme because you told us that you wanted to keep connected through this period and you wanted to keep learning through this period. And the webinars have proved popular. Do keep sending us your feedback, keep sending us ideas for what you would like to hear about, and we will build that into our programme. So it's events@womeninfootball.co.uk to reach out to us about this. So for today's webinar, feel free to introduce yourselves on the chat and say who you are and what you do, and your interests and your views on this topic. As ever with chat functions in forums like this, please do keep the chat respectful, positive and polite. And please also use the chat function to put in any questions that you have for our panellists about this topic, and we will pick those up and ask the panellists. We're recording this webinar as we do with all our webinars, and it will be available later on our website and on our YouTube channel. And all our previous webinars are there, so if you've missed any, do take a look, because we've had a fantastic range of speakers and topics over recent months. So that's the end of the housekeeping. Let's move on to the topic of the day and do some introductions. So I'm Jane Purdon, I'm the CEO of Women in Football, but today is all about male allies, so enough about me. Let me introduce our four amazing panellists. First up, we have Paul Barber. Paul is the CEO and Deputy Chairman of Brighton Hove Albion FC, and he's had a stellar career which has taken in the FA, Tottenham Hotspurs and the Vancouver Whitecaps. He's now at Brighton, where he's been for 9 years, but in addition to his role at Brighton, he is a board member of Women in Football, and he also sits on various high-level FA committees. It would take me at least an hour, more like half a day, to list all Paul's incredible achievements. What I am going to say, and with this topic of male allyship in mind, is that I know that equality and diversity and driving them in football is something which really sits in Paul's heart, and I know that from talking to him. And we were delighted when he applied to join our board, and again from talking to Paul, I know that he did that from a position of absolute passion and commitment to gender diversity and inclusion within the game. So welcome, Paul.
Thank you.
Moving on, next up is Mann MBE. Mann is an outstanding sports filmmaker and broadcaster and consultant. He's interviewed some of the biggest names in football, including David Beckham, including Shelley-Ann Fraser-Pryce and many others. He's made 2 critically acclaimed documentaries for the BBC, including one on Usain Bolt, and he owns Refresh Sports, an independent production company and sports consultancy. Outside his day job, Leon is a co-founder of the Football Blacklist. Now, if you don't know the Football Blacklist, do check it out. It's an initiative that highlights the achievements of the Black community in sport. And he's also the founder of BCOMS, the Black Collective of Media in Sport, a networking group for Black sports journalists. And Leon is also another huge friend of Women in Football, and we're delighted he's here today. Welcome, Leon. Kieran Theivam is the communications manager at the FA, looking after the Barclays FA Women's Super League and the FA Women's Championship. Now, Kieran has covered the women's game since 2011 in various roles, including work with FIFA, including a spell at the Athletic, and numerous freelance writing and broadcasting assignments. He wrote a fantastic book in 2019 to coincide with the Women's World Cup in France about the making of the Women's World Cup. So when it comes to male allyship, Kieran has truly walked the walk here for 10 long years. Outside football, he doesn't just walk the walk, he's running at the moment this month. He's running 150 kilometres with 3 other guys to raise funds for 2 charities in memory of those who very tragically have been lost through COVID. On his fundraising page for this, he says, let me quote this because I love this quote, "Don't expect Olympic qualifying times. Do expect resilience and determination to get this done." I love that, Kieran, because at WIF, we central to our work is helping people with their careers, and those words, resilience and determination, are 2 of our watchwords for this. Welcome, Kieran, and good luck with the rest of your run this month. And our 4th panellist is Troy Townsend. Troy is Head of Player Engagement at Kick It Out, which I'm sure you know is football's equality and inclusion charity. The core focus of his role at the moment is to deliver education within professional football academies, focusing on anti-racism, focusing on discrimination. Troy's worked extensively in the education sector and has received many accolades in sport for his work, in particular with young people. He does a lot of work on addressing gaps in representation in football and on coaching and supporting young people who are looking to break into the industry. He's a key spokesman on the issue of racism in football and the treatment of Black and brown players. Welcome, Troy, and welcome all of you. You're all very welcome. So I think that's enough for me, and I'm going to hand over to our panellists and start with a question. The person who wants to just pick this up if you'd like to give it an answer. What do you think a male ally is? I'm going to have a go at that.
I'll go, Jane, if you want. That's no problem. Well, I think for me, it's about providing support in the case of the football industry for women that are in the football industry or want to get into it. It's about speaking out and making sure that sometimes a voice that's perhaps not expected to be heard is heard. It's about removing barriers, and it's about challenging behaviour that isn't acceptable. And I think I start from my own position of, I suppose, being male, being white, and being able-bodied. You know, I try to look at things from the lens of being very fortunate in many ways in our society to be those 3 things. And if you look at some of the challenges that people are not those 3 things have got, including women, including people of colour, including people of with disabilities, life can be very difficult, and particularly in an industry like ours. And I think, I just consider myself to be very lucky. And if I've got an opportunity to challenge and support and help and, see, people that are not like me progress, then that's got to be a good thing for our sport.
And I think I said at the top, Paul, that, I know from speaking to you, this comes from the heart for you. I just wondered, speaking to the other panellists, do you agree with that definition? And again, is this something I sense from knowing all of you as I do, that again, this comes from a real place of passion and emotion, but I don't want to speak for you. Tell us a little bit about that and your role as male allies.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to add some thoughts to what Paul's just said, because essentially for me, I think, a male ally is somebody is aware of the world that they live in. And I don't think that is something which necessarily all men in the world, all men in the football industry are aware of. They're aware of their own positionality, they're aware of their own views, their own experiences, and find it very, very difficult to move outside of that box. For me, first of all, we have to recognise that we live in a world that is not equal. So while we might tell our children everybody's equal, well, actually we're lying to them because they're not. Because the minute you are born black, the minute you are born a woman, the minute you are born with a disability, you are not equal in this world. And unfortunately, that applies to every industry. It's not just the football industry, but every industry you go into. So therefore, I believe that we all have to work hard to make sure that we are understanding the perspectives and the experiences of others. And that should inform our own actions and what we do as individuals within our own industries. you know. So for me, you know, I'm the co-founder of the Football Blacklist. So I felt great about the Football Blacklist when we launched it, because this is fantastic. We're doing something for Black people. And then I kind of looked around and I just thought, geez, there's a lot of men. there's not many women here. So I had to check myself as part of that process and begin to think from a different perspective, and then ensure that it was a truly inclusive movement, inclusive event. Because I might be able to say, oh, well, what we're doing is great for the Black community, but actually what would have been more accurate at the beginning of that journey is to say for Black men in the community. And actually that is not representative of our community at all. So I think it's about an awareness, and I think it's really important that we have events like this to be able to say these things out loud, because sometimes we can get caught in our bubbles, sorry to use COVID terms now, but our bubbles, where we can kind of feel that we're surrounded with people with similar views to us and we feel very comfortable in that space, but actually there's a lot of work to do outside of our own bubbles.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Leon.
very much Paul and what Leon has said is very much part of my thought process. But if you don't mind, I just want to take you back. I've had two kind of working arenas, the education sector, as mentioned, Jane, and obviously the football sector. When I was in the education environment, I didn't know what male allyship was. I predominantly worked in primary schools. I was a PE teacher, and then my business was to provide PE tutors across the board. And anyone that knows that when you're in the primary sector, males are a minority. So my working life has been around women, listening to women, understanding women, giving advice, sharing, journeys, etc. And I just felt it was a norm. My coaching life has also seen me coach boys and girls, men and women. So I look at it as the norm. I've got to be honest with you. I'm well into my nearly 10 years now at Kick It Out. It's only when I came into the football environment that I appreciate and understood the impact of football on women in this, and the game, and how women weren't represented. And I then realized that when I was head of the program for mentoring Raise Your Game, that women were also not coming to events, open events as well. So one of my first events that I held at the TUC Congress House, when we evaluated, there was 9% of women that attended the whole event. And I was told, yeah, that's about the norm. That's fine. That's about the norm. And I was thinking to myself, well, how can that be the norm? That there must be a blockage there somewhere. There must be something that is not in, or someone, whatever organization that's not empowering women to be at these events. And it was a goal of mine to address that. And in surveys and in conversation, it was always, we're not really comfortable. We don't feel like we can be ourselves. And so we created a women's only event. And all of a sudden, there was this safe space. There was this safe space for women to attend. There was this safe space for have conversation, to understand the journeys of other women, but also connect with like-minded men. And I think that was the important thing to me, that then raised a lot of awareness around the work that needed to be done. And I had the pleasure of connecting with women in football really early in my tenure at Kick It Out. And I suppose in being at some of those events, and I have to say now face to face, because obviously face to face now seems like a thing of the past. But being at some of those events, you really got a feel and understanding about what allyship was, and being a male in this space, but also how one of the best things you can do is listen. And then two, from your own journey, the other best thing you can do is to guide and give that important advice that is needed along the way. So whilst I will say that, I've now learned about the male allyship kind of arena and why it's so important, I must admit for a lot of my journey, I just didn't see it at all, because of the way I'd been brought up and the working circles that I was in. So I'm very proud to again be sitting on a panel that helps my understanding as well as the things that I would say today.
Fantastic. Thanks, Troy. And Kieran, coming to you, and I mean, one of the reasons why male allies is so important in football is because men hold the power, right? Or historically they have held the power, but you have walked the walk in the women's game for 10 years now. So What does the male ally involved in the women's game look like?
Yeah, I guess for me, it was about trying to elevate and promote the women's game when I started out. Obviously, I think my first experience of women's football was back in 2009 when the Lionesses got through to the final of the Women's European Championships. And obviously, you get a buzz. I know they lost the final, but I wanted to absorb myself into the game. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to find out more, and the information it wasn't there. So there were a very small pool of journalists who were covering the women's game, and I took it upon myself to try and, I guess, fill a little bit of a gap and join that pool. And whether that was through blogging initially or podcasting or whatever it might be, that for me was trying to, as I say, to elevate and promote. And I think that's what I've done or tried to do for the last 10 years. It's supporting the women, but also I think what it enabled me to do was to tell their stories, because there are so many incredible stories in the women's game. I've been able to speak to so many different players from so many different countries, and they've all got a story to tell because they haven't been picked up, or certainly when I started out, and certainly for the last number of years, they're not picked up and put in academies at 7 or 8 years old. They all have a story to tell. They all have lives away from the field. But what I will say is that, it is largely males in positions of power, but I get to work with two incredible women in Sue Campbell and Kelly Simmons at the FA, who have, I think, really led the way in terms of the development of the women's game in this country. And I feel very privileged to be able to learn and from them and to work with them. But I think, from my position in what I do, it's about elevation and about promoting and making sure that the women's game and women's football is being seen as equal to the men's. And it will take time. We're in a much better place now than when I picked it up in 2009, 2010, that sort of time. But we've still got a long way to go, a lot of work to do, but that's certainly being done at the moment.
So I love this. I think what I've picked up so far from all of you is the central, the key elements of allyship. Well, number one, listening. I think, Troy, you were really strong on that, and I completely agree with you. Number two, elevating and amplifying. And Kieran, in your role, that's actually what you do to build the women's game. And number three, acting on it. And again, I heard, Leon, you changed what BComs were doing. Troy, you changed what the Racial Game Conference was doing, and touches on an old phrase that the old suffragettes use, that we use a lot in Women in Football: deeds, not words. A little less conversation, a little more action. If you prefer Elvis Presley to the Pankhurst, there you go.
I was just hoping you was going to sing that, Jane, more than say it, really.
If you another time, Troy, if you in the days when once we can go out for a beer again, you can buy me a beer and I'll give you my Elvis impression. Anyway, deeds, not words. And so we heard a couple of you have done. Paul, at Brighton, what's Brighton doing to help progress the careers of women who work for the club?
Well, I think deeds, not words is probably the thing that motivates us. First of all, we've just built, and we're about to open next month, our women and girls football headquarters at our training ground in Lancing. So it's on the same site as the men's and boys, and that will be for the women's first team and for all of our girls academy teams. So there's a real demonstration to the women and girls that play at our club that they're as important as the men and the boys, that they are entitled to facilities that are comparable. And that's a visible demonstration of deeds and not words. We can talk about being inclusive and we can talk about supporting the women's game, but there's a real action there. And I think in terms of the club as a whole, I think joining Women in Football as the first corporate member was another example to our female staff that we do mean what we say, and we say what we mean. And we've used Women in Football to work with us to develop courses, to create a sense that the women that are in the football club have not got a glass ceiling, that they can progress, that there is a pathway for them, that they will be supported, that we will, remove barriers, all the things that I talked about. And I suppose the thing, I've had 2 or 3 moments in my career that have been sort of real eye-openers for me. First of all, back in the FA days in 2000, having Hope Powell march into my office and basically say, Paul, I can't put on a training session this week because I don't have enough balls. This is for the England women's senior team. That really shocked me. And anyone on this call, and I know there's a few of you that know Hope really well, you know, she doesn't take no as an answer. I can't do that, or we can't do that. You know, she stands in front of you until you actually do something, and words are not enough. You've got to show her that you mean business. And you know, she really opened my eyes to the troubles and the challenges that women's football had back 20 years ago. The second time was when I went to Vancouver, and just saw in my early days there that our women's team were actually attracting bigger crowds than our men's team. And that was a real sort of wake up moment for me that, you know, women's football can and should be taken seriously everywhere, because there is an audience and there's some really, really talented athletes around. And then I think probably the third thing was actually having two daughters. And suddenly, as Troy said, having to really listen, because their perspective of the world was actually very different to my son's perspective, who was born first. And all three of them grew up in and around football. And some of the things that the girls experienced were quite shocking. And when you heard them talk about them, I was, even as recently as the Euro semi-final a couple of weeks ago, you know, my two daughters, who both work in Premier League football clubs now, were abused and challenged and jostled as they went into Wembley. You know, what are you doing here? You know, why are they wasting tickets on you? What do you know about the game? You know, what the hell, you know, this is ridiculous. We haven't got tickets and you've got tickets. It was quite shocking. And they're both, you know, they both grow up around football. They understand, you know, that there are still some of those attitudes there. But I think to hear from them, you know, that story, and many others, and luckily they're both working in clubs that really support their careers and want them to do well and want them to progress and are prepared to remove barriers. But that's not the same for every woman or girl that wants to work in football or is working in football. So for me, there's been lots of things where, you know, actions rather than words are really important, but words, when people actually use them, you have to listen. And the girls have been really helpful to me in actually sort of saying, you know, the way you run the football club is this, but sometimes when you say that, it's perceived like this, and you have to go, oh, okay, my language has to change a little bit, or my attitude has to change a little bit, or I have to, you know, create an environment that's a little bit different to the one that I thought I was going to create, because it doesn't play as well to the female members of staff as I thought it did. And so listening, as Troy said, is really, really important.
Thanks, Paul. I move on to the question of intersectionality, which is, I think, Leon, you were really open in saying, like, you didn't necessarily understand all women's issues and you had to go on a learning journey. And I've been the same since last summer, trying to understand better the experience of Black people. We talk a lot about intersectionality. Maybe, Troy, I could ask you your work with young people. What do you think intersectionality means? And what do you think are the additional challenges faced by Black and brown women to thrive in the football industry?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and it would kind of mean something different to, I think, all of us in some stages, but it's almost like breaking down the barriers and bringing us all together, regardless of your background, regardless of your sexuality, regardless of your faith, your religion, your gender, your nationalities, and it's working in a space that we can all feel confident and comfortable about each other. You know, so as a Black man, me going in with a white woman and not, you know, that white woman not feeling inferior about who I am and maybe the words and language that I use, but it's also me showing respect. And I think respect needs to be a core value of everybody. If we cannot approach any situation or any conversation with respect, then where are we, you know? And I think it's so important. And I think it's one of the things that we try to instill in the young people when they come to our events is, first and foremost, you know, one, you're almost got an opportunity to create your own journey with the mentors and the people that they will speak to. So, you know, respect for their position is really important, but also an understanding of who you are and how much value you have. You know, I'm not sure I appreciated the value of many people in this space until I got to know them, and then the value and respect came following on. And I think there's a really important thing here where we're actually, you know, respect should be the core of what everything we do, and I say that because it's not always given. And I do think there's a massive challenge in this space at the moment for our Black and brown women. I don't see them promoted in various areas enough. I hear the stereotypical language that is used against them, that continues to be used against them in 2021. And I often want our young, not want, talk with our young women, particularly our black and brown women, about being authentic. You know, so if someone doesn't like you for who you are, it's not about you changing, it's about them understanding. And I think that is a massive challenge at the moment, is to allow those women to be authentic, to be you, you know, and sometimes the industry has to realize that it has to change to accept more people into this environment. So I think women are progressing in football. I have a number of friendships now, and I would say that also, let's not fear having friendships with women. You know, professional friendships that could help you, that could help them, and that doesn't create a conversation that, you know, has probably been had many times before. I have developed some great relationships. I call many my friends. You know, I try to promote what they do, but also want to provide them with that opportunity to speak to me honestly, openly, as I've mentioned before. And I think that's something that we could really take on board in this space. But for me, I must admit, the real challenge is still about the lack of representation in regards to women from the black community, from the Asian community, in various different avenues in the game. And it's something that, again, we'll be focusing on once we get our work up and running again as we were before lockdown.
And Kieran and Leon, with your experience in football writing, football media, and that question of intersectionality and the experiences of black and brown women, what do you think that's looking like at the moment? And is anything changing?
I mean, I've been out of the writing game for probably 15 to 18 months, and I think it would be fair to say that it wasn't in a great position when I left it. I mean, if I look at the women that I deal with, and there are thankfully more women now, and that was something that I was really keen to try and to change, I guess, when I was working as a journalist. You know, when I was working as a writer, and I still work with them now, one of the things that I wanted to do was to mentor. I took on 4 young female writers who I really wanted to see thrive, and when I leave a job that I had in as a journalist, I wanted one of them to be in a position to replace me. You know, I was really keen for them to thrive, and you know, thankfully they've all gone on to do really well and get jobs. But one of the areas 100% that was lacking is that diversity. And when I look at the group of writers that I work with now, there's very little representation. And that is something that needs to change, and it's across the board, as Troy outlined. It's an industry-wide issue that needs to be addressed. But certainly from the writing side that I had, very little diversity. But I think, you know, and I hope that through groups like what Leon is running, I hope that we get to see more of that. Obviously, BComs, and he would be able to tell you a little bit more about it. But BComs do some work with the FA. We have some of their young talent working with us, or certainly have had. So I hope that we see more of that, and it allows them to thrive and to improve, and hopefully creates opportunities for them.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, you know, we're if you were to describe the situation with Black and Asian women in sports writing, you know, crisis is a word that wouldn't go far enough. You know, it's an absolute mess, you know, in terms of the lack of representation. It's really, really worrying. In fact, I'd say to anybody watching this, if you want to put the name of a black writer who hasn't played sport professionally, so not Denise Lewis writing a column or somebody having a column ghosted for them, I'd be really interested to kind of get the perspective of how everyone who's watching this is seeing our national newspapers. Now, all of them know that they've got work to do. BComs has partnerships across the sports media to try and push things forward. For us, you know, we started as a voluntary group of Black sports journalists who didn't trust our industry, so we had to do something ourselves. It was a very grassroots response. We went directly to the young people, we went directly to the bosses, We lobbied the bosses for change. We got into our young people to support them, to help them through their journey, to hold their hand, to be there as mentors, to let them know what was normal, what wasn't normal. Now we have masterclasses that take place with many young people, both in the north of England and in the south of England. And we're developing some other initiatives to be more hands-on, because you know, the industry is at a point, and I think this probably applies to the football industry generally as well, where everybody is at the stage of saying, we know we need to do more, but the what we need to do more is the thing we're working on. We really need some help on this. And I believe that it's a real critical point for all of us in terms of collaborating where the expertise exists. So making sure that when those leaders are saying, what do we do here, that actually we're putting them together with people who can help, who have been delivering in these areas for years and years and years. And in the sports media, you know, I hope to see many, I mean, already we're seeing loads and loads of the young people from our masterclasses not only go on to get jobs in the industry, but they're actually up for awards. I mean, I'm the vice chair of the Sports Journalists Association. And when I'm looking at the young sports journalists, writers and broadcasters, I'm like, oh, well, that's amazing. Because I remember when they rocked up from university at a BComs event, and then they've kind of got connected with a Kick It Out, and then they've got, you know, and they've really kind of worked their way through the industry to get to where they can obviously shine. So as an industry, we just need to be really, really acutely aware of what we're doing. You know, what is the strategy? Who are the experts? Who are we pointing people in the direction of? And how do we make sure there are opportunities for our young people and other people who aren't young, who just want a career change and love football, but to be able to push through and change this dynamic that we've been aware of for years, and now we're saying it out loud and talking about a lot more.
Jane, I just wanted to add, and Leon's, you know, what Leon said there is absolutely right. We've worked together, we've worked opposite each other, we've worked in the same space for a really long time. But I'd like to applaud the attitude of our young people now, and particularly our young women, you know, because if I go back to a period of time when maybe I wanted to get into the industry after a failed football career, as a black man, it was very daunting. I would say that that's even more daunting for a young black, brown woman. But what I've learned over a long period of time, but I'm particularly pleased about over this period of time in lockdown, is that our creative young people, our young people that can influence, our young people that, you know, can engage really well, our young people who are being empowered by so many, and particularly from a female perspective, they're going for it. They're going for their guns. And I'm proud, and I know Leon is, and I know, to be fair, everyone on the platform today, as to what they have achieved in a short space of time, knowing that the journeys are only gonna go up and up and up. And I think sometimes we don't promote the good work, and I'll say football collectively doesn't promote the good work that is going on, that can, you know, escalate the young voices, the young female voices, for others behind them to see them achieving at such a young age, so that they can also feel that the game is open to them to get into, in no matter what walk of, you know, what space that you want to get into. So I think we need to be better at being more proactive about our success stories as well.
And that comes back to amplification, doesn't it? And we've got some fantastic questions and comments coming through, and I'm going to turn to those in a sec. So to everyone on the call, if you've asked your question, we will be coming to that. But I just want to ask one more question, maybe for you, Paul. What would you say to any woman, so let's say a woman working in a maybe junior to middle role at Brighton, who thinks, I would like a bit of allyship. Suppose she knocked on your door as the CEO and said that. What would you say to her? Oh, Paul, she just flipped the mute.
That would help, wouldn't it? Sorry. I think first of all, I would say great for knocking on the door. Secondly, I would like to think that the organisation is set up to be supportive in that situation. And now, going back to what I said at the start about being, you know, my male, white and able-bodied, you know, I consider myself to be lucky, but I shouldn't really, because actually everyone should feel lucky, regardless of whether they are one of those things or not. or all of those things. And, you know, a measure of our organisation, you know, we start from the position, does our football club look like our community? Because if it doesn't, we're doing something wrong. Does our football club look like our sport? Because if it doesn't, we're doing something wrong. And does our football club look like our wider society? Because if it doesn't, we're doing something wrong. Now, we're not going to solve all of those problems or all of those challenges or reach all of those targets overnight. But if we recognise them, then we've got a chance of doing something about it. And it's the same as if someone knocks on your door. If they knock on your door, it's because for whatever reason, they either need support or help, they need guidance, they need inspiration, or they need a pathway to give them a chance to achieve what they want to achieve. So, you know, for me, I would encourage it, you know, and hopefully if there's a few of our staff on this call, you know, they might come and do it. But, you know, at the end of the day, I think with every sort of process of change, you have to start somewhere. And it's all too easy to say it's too difficult. It's also easy to say we can't take that first step, but actually that's what you have to do. And, you know, you have to take the first step in any walk of life if you want to bring about some change. But as I say, our little golden rules of do we look like our community? Do we look like our sport? Do we look like our society as a whole? Are the things that try and guide us. And that applies in every part of our EDI policy. And, you know, we're not perfect. We've still got so much more to do. And I would love it if we could start sort of seeing ourselves in those three dimensions and say, yeah, actually, do you know what? We do look like our community. We do look like our sport. We do look like our society. The media should be able to say the same thing and do the same thing. Right the way across our industry, we should be looking at that. So there is a long way to go, but hopefully we're taking some important first steps, and things like this are really important for, you know, for people to hear that it's on the agenda, and that, you know, people that like us on this panel are prepared to do something about it.
And I think some of you may know, perhaps not everyone on the webinar may know, but at Women in Football, we kind of issued a statement or a call to arms last week, if you like, to say it's time that the leadership of English football looks like the population of England, which is your point, Paul, about your aspirations for Brighton. We know it will take some time yet to get there, but it's time for football to agree, yeah, that's the clear vision. This is the roadmap for how we're going to get there, and this is the resource plan behind it. We've got some questions coming in, and actually on this, there's a couple about fans, which I'm going to pick out, and again, maybe come to you, Paul. Firstly, Sally Friedman, I think this is a comment really, rather than a question. Oh no, there's a question at the end. Sally was also at the Euro final and experienced exactly the same thing as what your daughters experienced, Paul. It breaks my heart. You know, I went to football as a female fan in the 1980s, and it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad. It breaks my heart. We seem to have progressed 40 years. Anyway, Sally says, I have enough stories for a book about being a female working in a male-dominated world. Sally, write that book. Write that book. You have some experts here on writing that can help you. Anyway, Sally's question, I'm going to combine it with another question. How can we ensure more males around the game are aware and take immediate action to change? I think that's very general. How can we ensure more males generally across the game? But I'd like to combine it with a question from Fiona Oteng, which is about fans. I think making women and women of colour more visible in spaces like football stadiums and at events will make a difference. Are there support networks so it's less intimidating? Maybe, Paul, I could ask you about that fan question. How are you encouraging women and black and brown women to come to Brighton games and be fans? And then maybe for all of you, how can we encourage more men to be male allies?
Well, I think zero tolerance on racist behaviour in and around the stadium is an absolute prerequisite. And, you know, again, in football over many years, we've talked a lot about dealing with these problems, but sometimes the action has lagged. And here we are, you know, we've been criticised in the past for being too heavy-handed with our zero tolerance. But if you're not going to bring about change. And for me, there has to be a combination of sanction and education. You know, we've tried education for many, many years, and it's worked to some degree, but it hasn't worked enough, and it's not working quickly enough. So there's got to be some sanctions as well. And for us, if you want to behave in a racist way in the stadium, or if you want to be misogynistic, if you want to be sexist, if you want to discriminate in any way, you're going to leave the stadium very, very quickly. And we will seek a prosecution as well, because that's the only way people are going to learn that it's unacceptable. And then there's got to be some education alongside it, and there has to be that twin track for us. And we've taken a lot of stands over the past 3 or 4 years to make sure that that kind of behaviour is not just dealt with on the day, but we then communicate afterwards why we've dealt with it, so that everyone can learn something from it, and hopefully it stops the next person from behaving like that. But certainly when it comes to women in the stadium, whether they're black or brown, or women of any colour or race in the stadium, we want them to feel it's a safe place. We want them to enjoy themselves. We want them to feel as if they're as much part of the crowd as anyone else. So, I think we've got to challenge sexist behaviour. I think we've got to encourage other males to challenge sexist behaviour. I think, when your mates behave in a way that is on the edge of being unacceptable to women or anyone else, you've got to say something. You've got to actually stand up and be counted. Otherwise, things won't change. I think as I've got older, I suppose I've become more aware, but also more confident to challenge, and more determined to, if I'm going to make a difference, it means starting somewhere, taking that first step. And if that means me, and I've actually been at this stadium on a couple of occasions where I've walked around the stadium either before or after a game, and I've heard stuff and I have challenged it. Just say, come on, guys, what's that about? Why would you make that comment? It's unacceptable. And it's amazing, actually, the response you get. More often than not, it's more positive than you think it's going to be. And then that gives you the confidence and encouragement to do it again. And others around say, oh, okay, if he's prepared to challenge it, maybe we should as well. So I would like to think, and again, we're by far from perfect here, but I'd like to think that women of any colour would be happy to be in this stadium and to enjoy a good day out here watching football and treat it as an equal.
And to everybody, the second part of the question was, how do we encourage more men to be true allies and male allies?
Yeah, I mean, I guess first of all, just to Fiona's question about particular groups. I mean, I don't know if Fiona's familiar with Nutmegs, which has been started up by Hayley Bennett. I would search that group out. It's a group kind of targeting and working with women of colour and setting an experience around going to football and what football means and how we consume football. So I would highly recommend searching out Nutmegs as a group of reference to check out. And I've also seen your other question, Fiona. Sorry, I'm just looking at these questions down here. In terms of being a filmmaker and not having experience, I think the answer to that is collaboration. So seek out people like Simone Stewart, Zainab Taladia, Tanya Motti. And sorry, Jane, to your question, in terms of what we can all do as men, is I think we just need to have those conversations with our fellow men in the industry, because they will behave in a different way when women leave the room. I'm sorry, that's my experience. When women leave the room, there are some men who will act in a particular kind of way, and then it's almost like the woman's come back into the room, let's get back on best behavior again. And actually, I have to reject that behavior. I have to say, nah, that's not for me in my work environment, in my personal life environment. This isn't something I can accept. And that can be difficult when you feel like you are the one person who's going to upset the apple cart that's been happily moving along in a particular way for a long, long time. I do think football has an issue in particular around that kind of behavior. I think that's based on the nature of the relationships that many people have within the game, be that as players, be that in that kind of environment, because let's face it, there's not a lot of people who leave the game because it's almost like working on your hobby. So as a result of that, the way people behave can be reflective of how they might behave watching football with their mates. So actually, we have to all set the terms of what is acceptable within our industry, and we have to set the terms of what's acceptable for people coming to football. Because I was at that final on that Sunday, and I'd never seen anything like it, before and after the game. I've been watching football all around the world, and normally when there's problems at football, you cross the road. You could not cross the road. It was that bad. It was seriously something. And I was there with my 9-year-old daughter. You know, I literally had to pick her up and carry her through these crowds while beer cans are flying through the sky. I'd never seen anything like it. People just lost their minds. But we just have to be really, really clear in saying this is unacceptable, and speaking to people in our own circles who might find, well, Leon, calm down. It's a final. What's your problem? You know, like, of course you're going to get to the pub at 8:30 in the morning and drink through to 4 o'clock. Of course you're going to do that. Well, actually, if you're going to do that in a way that allows everybody else to be able to go to the game and enjoy it as well. You know, this isn't just about you as an individual. This is about what you contribute to by coming to a game.
Yeah, sorry, just to pick up, Jane, really sorry. I actually think, particularly as we've spoken about that Euro final, and then I'll touch on the advice bit, but I think it's going to get better before it gets worse. And I think we're going to have to appreciate and understand that, and football's going to have to set its tone really early when fans do come back. Because at the moment, I think everyone's seeing, you know, the call of freedom as something that means that they can do what they want, when they want, how they want now, because they've been locked down for far too long. And I think in that, because women are a minority, they're going to be a target for a lot of these males who act in a way that honestly should get them locked up, if you want me to be totally honest. You know, I go football on a consistent basis to watch my son, and my daughters come with me. And I feel very proud that they've never had to face anything quite general as that, but also they've had to face the language that, you know, around them as such, that is never kind of monitored. And, you know, they're old enough now to be able to deal with it, but I'm not sure I'd like them to go without me. So that's one thing. In regards to support for Black and brown females, we run a Fans for Diversity program that has been in place now for quite a number of years, that has supported so many different kind of groups, underrepresented groups throughout football. And I think it's a really good opportunity if you wanted to get involved in our Fans for Diversity or understand more about Fans for Diversity to get in touch with Anwar Uddin, who heads up that campaign. He's an ex-professional footballer. And then I've just seen Sally's response about the book, and this resonates so much. It is so hard to talk about the negative things that happen in this game while you're in the game.
I'm just going to come in there because I think only the panelists can see what Sally has put. So what Sally has put for everybody's information is the book has been started. Great, Sally. It will hopefully be published when I retire. If I publish it now, I don't think my career will last much longer. And
that's what's so sad, Jane. It's you cannot be open and honest about your experiences while you're living in the game. You know, you have to retire, make sure that you're safe, and then you can write away and you know, and then people are going to go, wow, I didn't know things like that happen. But why should Sally's voice be quietened now? Because if she's having those negative experiences, and I've got to be honest, I hear that far too often, and for me, that is a massive worry as well. Male figures in this industry have to come out of their comfort zone, and I like what Leon said. You know, when you're in the room, right, we'll be prim and proper, but when you've left the room, we're going to be ourselves again. We're going to be our laddish self again, and it's fine us challenging it, but there's also an element of people got to look in the mirror now and be held accountable for the language and be held accountable for the way they treat people, good, honest people that want to excel and work in this game. And it's just not, I don't find that it's fair.
Yeah. And I think that goes back to something we heard earlier about a key part of allyship is listening. And listening is quite a skill, isn't it? It does involve being prepared to be challenged, to hear uncomfortable stuff, to truly listen and shut up while you give the floor. It's a great phrase I heard, you know, when I was trying to read about Black experiences, you know, you need to hand over the mic, give people the mic and let them see. We have a million questions coming through, so I'm going to go to another question. And listen, apologies to the participants if we don't get round to all of them. I'm going to do my best. So we have, I think Fiona we answered that question about fan networks, and I was going to mention that Megs. There's another new one started called, I think, Her Game Too. It's a group of younger women, and they're worth looking out on Twitter. And of course, there's the Football Supporters Association. Fiona also asked about boardrooms, and if you're just starting out, how can you get on a board? Fiona, come and talk to us separately. We do a lot of work on this. And we have a lot of information and resources about that on our website.
Jane, just as a word of warning, you end up looking like me if you're on a football club board, so you don't want to rush too quickly to get there, trust me.
Thanks, Paul. Kieran, we've got, Tamara has said she was actually horrified by a man commentating on an Olympic women's football match, Sweden v Australia. And perhaps I can try and summarise the comment she's put here. It's, what do you think, again, with thinking about allyship, thinking about how we're all trying to showcase and promote the women's game, because we know it's on a huge growth trajectory. Do you think what do you think is the sort of general standard of commentary that you're hearing? What can be done to improve it?
Yeah, there's work to be done. I heard that commentary and it wasn't up to the standard that it should be. And if it was a men's game, I think it would have been all over social media and probably would have been trending. I think what we find quite often in the women's game is that we have commentators who are more predominantly used to commentating on the men's game, so they're familiar with the names, they're familiar with the players. All of a sudden, they're thrust into an environment where it's out of their comfort zone, it's out of a situation that they're used to. That's no excuse. One of the things that, and one of the reasons that I've been able to get to where I am in the women's game is by doing my research, by making sure that I'm better informed. If you're a commentator, and this, I guess, anyone that's looking to go into commentary, and I'm not a commentator, so I'm not speaking from any sort of experience, but the way that you will make your name in the women's game is by doing the work and demonstrating that you have a knowledge. So learn the players' names, learn their backgrounds, make sure you know who they are, make sure you know their backstories. We don't need to know major sort of details and their background in terms of where they went to school and things like that, but give us the information that is useful for those, whether you're an established women's football fan or whether you are brand new to the game. And I know that internally we are looking at some of the work that we do. Obviously, we have the FA Player, which obviously showcases the Women's Super League every week and some Women's Championship games as well. Commentary is definitely an area that we're looking at. But no, I agree. The commentary of that game in particular was really poor. And I know that that commentator probably will have seen the responses and probably won't be feeling too good about himself at the moment. But really, really important that you can demonstrate that you have done your research, you have done your work to prepare for that game, because women's football fans and the women's game doesn't deserve understandard or below par commentary or any kind of analysis. Treat it like you would a men's game, because that's where we want it to be. We want it to be equal, to do the same level of work that you would do for preparing for a men's game.
Thanks, Kieran. So moving on, Lillian, who's a Brazilian journalist, has been writing about football for over a decade. She's never had any male allies. She's had many treated as if she didn't belong. She's very discouraged about women's football being in Brazil. But then I got to know Riff, and that was a breath of fresh air. Thank you for your kind words, Lillian. That's what we're here for, to support each other and to support women like you working the game. Lillian, you've asked, can we indicate in books and websites to understand the subject better? Again, I think really starting point, have a good look around on our website, go and explore previous webinars that we've done, articles that we've done, and that should give you a starting point if you haven't done that already. I'm going to stick on because we have what I think is a fantastic question from Marion, who's the founder of the Africa Sports Foundation Centre in East Africa. And she said, I believe that part of the problem could be that some men see women as a threat and competition rather than allies. What do you think of that, panel? Do you think some men do see women as a threat?
Yeah, quite simply, I think in a game that is, let's face it, male, white, I think others are seen as, well, how they're going to fit into our club. And I think it is a sense of that. I get a sense of, this is our club. We have a way of doing things, and it's the way that things are done. When actually what we need to do to genuinely move football forward is disrupt that. Because we know, many of us who are working in diversity, who have spent some time exploring reports, academic papers, etc., we know that diverse groups perform better. For me personally, in my very, very small businesses, I don't want to employ people who look and sound exactly like me and have the same opinion as me and just nod back at me. That does not help me be as thorough as possible in vital decisions for my business. I need somebody actually who's more likely to disagree with me and have a completely different perspective, so I can explore that in a real thorough way, so that if I do make the decision that I think I was going to make, at least I've explored it thoroughly, or actually I make a completely different decision based on having different people around the table. Now, football, full stop, is facing a massive problem from board level to leadership level, right down in terms of a lack of leadership, a lack of diversity across leadership. We have a game in the men's game where 1 in 3 professional players is black. You know, the crowds, the audiences engaged with football are becoming more and more diverse. So therefore, we have a leadership of football clubs, a leadership of leagues, a leadership right across the game that does not have direct understanding and knowledge of the athletes and of the audience. Now, in any other business, if you were to break that down to somebody who was just interested in business, couldn't give a monkey's about football, they would say that does not make any business sense to me. You have people leading your organization, leading your work, that doesn't understand a significant part of your assets as a business and a significant part of your audience as customers. So we need to really move forward in terms of getting different people around those decision-making tables and all the way through the game. There are some good conversations going on. Some clubs, like Brentford, are being incredibly proactive. They're saying we will diversify our board very, very publicly. It'll be interesting to see what that looks like when they announce what progress they've made, which will be interesting to see. Why can't every single football club do that? Why can't every single football entity do that? And that absolutely, at the centre of that, is about getting women in positions of power within our game. What are we waiting for?
What are we waiting for? Totally agree, Leon. Listen, folks, we've got so many more comments, and I think we need to wrap it up now, because I know some of you have got other things that you need to go to. So apologies if we haven't got round to your comment or your question. I think I'm right in saying that we will try and follow up by email afterwards. So Laura, who's organised the call, maybe, I think that's what we do, Laura. Anyway, we'll sort that out afterwards. I just want to close with some reflections, but before I get to that, I just want to remind everybody who's attending that we're going to draw one name from everyone who's attended, and you'll have the chance to organise an hour's meeting with the panellists of your choice. So thank you, panel, for making your time available. And from what some of you have said and the way you're asking for advice and opinion, that's absolutely going to be a super valuable opportunity. So thanks and good luck to everybody in that. Let me close with some reflections and some things I've heard. There was one comment from Carla who said, I've been afforded opportunities and career progression from male allies, and it's been so important. It's basically what she was saying. Me too. That I can look back on my 20 years working for football. I've had some fantastic male allies, and they've been transformative for my career. They've helped me get where I am today. So any man who's on the call, who's thinking, how can I be a male ally and is it worth it? It 100% is. You can really transform and help people's lives. Any woman, non-binary person on the call who's thinking, well, I need an ally. I think you've heard from Paul, the CEO of Brighton. He would welcome people knocking on his door. So go and knock on people's doors. Don't be scared to do that. Some of the stuff you guys have said, I mean, it's so hard to summarise it, but again, that theme of deeds, not words. Call your mates out. I love that. I think that's so important. And we, make sure that the discrimination, we're not just tackling it at a public level, but behind the scenes as well. Respect is the core value. I wrote that down, Troy, and I love that. And male figures must come out of their comfort zone. And my final reflection was, I think we've all seen with this England team how football itself can be an ally, and it can be like an ally to the country, the whole country. That England team was. You know, we all warmed to it, emotions engaged with it, not just about the football, but the way those players carried themselves and held themselves, the causes they represent on and off the pitch as much as on it. They really were exemplary. So we all need to think about our own role as allies, and together we maybe that's what we should be aiming for, to make football truly an ally of everybody, so that everybody can thrive in it. We are a couple of minutes over time, so we need to wrap. Thank you so much to our wonderful panelists. You've been fantastic. Thank you to everybody who's attended and for your really kind of lively and energetic engagement and your questions. Keep in touch. Let us know what you think of this webinar. If you enjoyed it, please do tell the world on your Twitter, on your Instagram. And keep your eyes open for your Women in Football emails for all details of our next events. Thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of the day.